Welcome to Fireside Gaming. I'm Billum, and today we're checking out an indie game that's near and dear to my heart, Cardinal Quest 2. This is a game that I originally played through a pre-release way back in 2012, and it quickly became one of my favorite ways to kill time. Following that, the game got a full release on mobile and Steam in 2015. I actually missed this release and didn't pick up the game until about 3 years later. And when I did, I poured hours and hours into Cardinal Quest 2. It's fair to say that I've gotten way more than my money's worth out of this $5 purchase. If you've been watching the footage so far, you've likely already figured out some of the things about this game. For example, it's a roguelite, which means it adopts some of the staples of the rogue genre without adhering fully to the standards set by the 1980 classic. Now let's get something straight real quick. I am not a rogue connoisseur by any means. I enjoy some games that fit into this genre, such as Rogue Legacy and Cardinal Quest 2, but I'm not like the overall biggest fan of it, I just enjoy it. So what elements can roguelite fans find in Cardinal Quest 2 that mimic the original? First off, the game features randomly generated areas to explore. These reset each time the player dies and starts the game over from the beginning. However, players can choose to continue after death, but it affects their overall score at the end of the run. There's also a hardcore option that turns on permadeath if that's your preference. As for the gameplay, Cardinal Quest 2 is a turn-based top-down dungeon crawler RPG. What this means is that for every action the player takes, such as moving, attacking, casting a spell, or using an item, the enemies will act at that same time. This means players can stop and think about what they want to do in between actions, which can go a long way toward helping them avoid being overrun by enemies. Also, players collect experience from defeating enemies that ultimately leads to them leveling up. The game features simple skill trees that players can put points into to determine how they build their class. And I should also mention that Cardinal Quest 2 features 7 classes for players to experiment with. There's the Thief, which is best at performing stealth actions such as cloaking from enemies and backstabbing them. The Ranger, which travels alongside an animal companion and attacks from afar. The Wizard, who makes use of his intellect to outsmart enemies with spells. The Fighter, that can cut down any foe with his tempered steel. The Paladin, a man of God that brings down judgment on his enemies with holy blessings. The Pugilist, who challenges himself by taking part in battles barehanded. And finally, the Alchemist, who makes use of deadly concoctions and a trusty firearm to overcome danger. Players start out with just the Thief, the Fighter, and the Wizard, but can unlock the other classes the further they get into the game. It's also worth noting that each class comes with perks and starting equipment to choose from. Yet again, these are locked at first but can be unlocked by achieving certain goals with the character during a run. It may not seem like much, but there's a fair bit of customization for players to enjoy in Cardinal Quest 2. Some of the changes in starting perks and equipment can even result in players building their characters completely differently than what they have in prior runs. Another factor that affects builds is what players find during their playthroughs of the game. For example, I've been known to run a battle mage if I come across a particularly strong melee weapon. It makes for a different style of play, and I love how it can make runs feel drastically unique compared to others. The type of spells and items players find can also play a large part in how they play the game and what kind of skills they choose to obtain when leveling up. To go along with this, players can also experience 3 distinct acts, each with their own settings. Act 1 takes place in a forest that eventually leads into a tower. Act 2 starts on a frozen mountain and eventually leads to the mines and fire pits deep within. And the third act sees players traveling to a completely different dimension to tackle otherworldly evils. Each of these areas also come with their own unique enemies for players to encounter, as well as a final boss at the end of the act. This helps them to all stand out in their own way without deviating too much from what players have already learned about the game from prior areas. There's also a bonus act called the Tower that simply serves as an endless mode. I spent some time here just to check it out, but endless options just aren't really for me. I'm not the kind of person that gets a feeling of accomplishment from making it further and further into an unending dungeon. Rather, I just prefer when there's a decisive end waiting for me. With that in mind, players that do enjoy tough challenges can try to unlock the various achievements present in Cardinal Quest 2. The game has quite a fair amount of these, with many of them locked behind beating areas under very specific conditions. These can make runs incredibly hard, but rewarding when the player finally succeeds. While I'm not one for achievement hunting personally, Cardinal Quest 2 offers the right kind that actually feel like the type of challenge runs I'd like to make for myself in older games back before achievements even existed. I should note that there is a story that ties the three main acts together, but it's really more of a garnish with the gameplay being the main course. It's simple in nature, which isn't bad, but I often forget about it completely when playing the game. I'll also mention that players can use the mouse, keyboard, or a combination of both when playing Cardinal Quest 2. I personally find this super useful as it lets me sit back on the couch and play with a wireless keyboard. Then I can just leave the mouse somewhere else entirely and not have to worry about my son snatching it when I'm not looking and clicking everything. It's also a great option for playing on a laptop since you can avoid using the touchpad entirely. Also, the game's grid-based combat and simple bumping into enemies to attack makes it perfect for relaxed keyboard play. Graphically speaking, Cardinal Quest 2 is simple but effective. I'm quite fond of the style of sprites the game uses, and it all meshes well together. There's even a bit of character customization as players can choose between male or female as well as the skin tone they want. It's a small touch for such a simple game, but it's one that I really appreciate. The audio in Cardinal Quest 2 is incredibly solid. I really dig the music in the game, and it feels fitting for the areas that players are in. Combined with the visual style, it creates a strong cohesion with none of the elements feeling out of place. Overall, Cardinal Quest 2 is a lot of fun if you're looking for a simple roguelite game to play. It's not overly demanding, which makes it easy to do a run or two in your spare time, and the $5 price tag is easily worth it for the level of depth and customizations players will find in the game. It's one of my personal favorite indie games that I find myself going back to fairly frequently, even if it's just for a quick run here or there, or sometimes even tackling the harder challenges the game offers. Thanks for stopping by and checking out my indie insight into Cardinal Quest 2, and until next time, take it easy.